The human ship Aurora moved through space toward the crystalline planet that shimmered like a giant jewel against the darkness of the void. This was Velshara Prime, homeworld of the insectoid Velsharan Empire and one of the most powerful civilizations in the Galactic Council. Jake Morrison stood on the bridge and watched the planet grow larger on the viewing screen. He was the lead diplomat for this mission, and he knew how important it was for humanity's future in the galaxy 3 years ago. Humans had joined the Galactic Council as junior members, and many alien species still saw them as too young and too reckless to be trusted with serious responsibilities. "We're being hailed by the planetary defense grid," said Commander Lisa Chun from her station. She was the chief engineer, but also served as second-in-command on diplomatic missions like this one. Her practical mind and calm demeanor made her perfect for dealing with complex alien technologies. Jake nodded and straightened his formal diplomatic jacket. "Open the channel and let's make a good first impression." The viewing screen changed to show a Velsharan communications officer. The being had a sleek insectoid body with 4 arms and crystalline plates covering its exoskeleton. Its multifaceted eyes reflected light in rainbow patterns as it spoke through the translation device. "Human vessel Aurora, you are cleared to land at the Royal Spaceport. Queen Jathara herself will greet you, which is a great honor for such a young species." The officer's tone carried what the translator identified as mild condescension. "We are honored and grateful for the Queen's hospitality," Jake replied with a slight bow. Knowing that Velsharans respected formal gestures, the Aurora landed smoothly on a platform made of what looked like living crystal. The entire spaceport seemed to pulse with soft light from within its translucent structures. Lisa couldn't help but stare at the engineering marvel around them as the crew prepared to disembark. "Remember everyone," Jake said to his team of 6 humans. "The Velsharans are very traditional, and they value their history and artifacts above almost everything else. Don't touch anything unless you're invited to, and always show respect." The team stepped out onto the platform and immediately felt the difference in gravity. Velshara Prime had lighter gravity than Earth, which made every movement feel slightly bouncy and strange. A delegation of Velsharans approached them with precise synchronized movements. At the center walked Queen Jathara herself, and she was magnificent. Her exoskeleton was deep purple with veins of silver running through it like lightning frozen in crystal. And she stood nearly 8 feet tall with 6 arms adorned in ceremonial bands. "Welcome to Velshara Prime, humans." The Queen's voice resonated with harmonic overtones that the translator struggled to convey fully. "I am Queen Jathara, 47th ruler of my line and keeper of the sacred traditions." Jake bowed deeply and his team followed his lead. "Your Majesty, we are deeply honored by your personal greeting. I am Jake Morrison, and this is my team. We come in friendship and hope to build strong ties between our peoples." The Queen's mandibles clicked in what might have been approval. "Your species is young, but you have shown surprising resilience. Come, I will show you our palace, and we will discuss trade and cooperation." The walk through the palace was breathtaking. Everything was made of the same living crystal that seemed to grow and reshape itself according to unknown patterns. Walls curved in impossible angles and rooms opened into gardens where crystal plants chimed. In the wind, Lisa's engineering mind raced with questions about how the structures maintained their integrity and what energy source powered the bioluminescence. She made mental notes of everything she saw, while trying not to appear too eager or disrespectful. They entered the throne room, and Lisa's breath caught in her throat. The chamber was vast, and at its center stood a throne carved from a single massive crystal that refracted light into thousands of dancing colors. But what drew her attention was the armor displayed on a stand behind the throne. The armor was ancient and beautiful. It consisted of overlapping scales made from an alloy that seemed to shift between silver and gold depending on the viewing angle. Each scale was engraved with intricate patterns and symbols that told stories in a language Lisa couldn't read. "That is the armor of queens," Shathara said with deep reverence in her voice. "Worn by every ruler of my line for 7,000 cycles. It is our most sacred relic and the symbol of our legitimacy. No one may touch it except the reigning queen." Jake nodded solemnly and made sure his team understood the importance. "We will respect your sacred traditions, Your Majesty." The formal dinner that evening was held in a great hall where crystal chandeliers cast rainbow light across tables laden with foods from dozens of worlds. The Velcherons had carefully prepared dishes that humans could safely eat alongside their own crystalline nutrient matrices. Lisa sat near the middle of the human delegation and tried to focus on the diplomatic conversations around her, but her mind kept returning to the armor. Something about it had bothered her from the moment she saw it. There had been a pattern in the engravings that didn't quite match, as if something was wrong beneath the surface. Halfway through the meal, a Velcheron guard entered and spoke urgently to the queen in their native language. Shathara's posture stiffened and she rose from her seat. "Forgive me, honored guests," she said with tension in her harmonic voice. "There is an urgent matter I must attend to in the defense chambers. Please continue your meal and my staff will see to your comfort." The queen swept out of the hall with her guards following. The human team exchanged glances and continued eating, while making polite conversation with the remaining Velcheron officials. An hour passed and the dinner concluded. The humans were given a tour of the guest quarters, where they would stay during the negotiations. But Jake noticed that Lisa kept glancing back toward the throne room. "What's on your mind?" he asked her quietly. Lisa hesitated, then spoke softly. "The armor. Jake, I saw something that concerned me. There was a pattern in the metal that suggests microfracturing." Jake frowned. "You could see that just from looking at it?" "I've worked with exotic alloys for 15 years, Lisa explained, "and I know stress patterns when I see them. If I'm right, then armor could fail catastrophically. And given how sacred it is to them, don't even think about it." Jake cut her off firmly. "We're here on delicate diplomatic ground, and the last thing we need is to interfere with their most sacred relic." Lisa nodded, but the concern didn't leave her eyes. "I know, but Jake, what if?" "No," he said again. "We stay in our lane and focus on the trade agreements. Whatever issues they have with their artifacts are their business, not ours." The team settled into their quarters, and most of them went to sleep. But Lisa lay awake, staring at the ceiling and thinking about the armor if it failed. While the queen was wearing it in battle or ceremony, it could be disastrous. And what if someone got hurt because she stayed silent? Unable to rest, Lisa got up and walked through the quiet palace halls. She told herself she was just exploring and appreciating the architecture. But her feet carried her toward the throne room. The guards had been reduced to a minimal presence during the night cycle, and Lisa found herself standing at the entrance to the chamber. The armor glowed softly in the dim light and seemed to call to her engineer's instincts. She looked around and saw no one nearby. Making a quick decision, she pulled out her portable scanner, a small device, no bigger than her palm, that could analyze molecular structures without touching them. Lisa approached the armor stand and activated the scanner, running it carefully over the surface of the scales. The readings confirmed her fears. There were indeed microfractures spreading through the crystalline matrix of the alloy, and they were getting worse. She was so focused on the data that she didn't hear the footsteps behind her until it was too late. "Who touched my armor?" The roar shook the very walls of the throne room as Queen Shathara's voice resonated with fury and disbelief. Lisa spun around to see the queen standing in the doorway with 6 guards flanking her. The queen's exoskeleton had darkened to nearly black with rage, and her mandibles were spread wide in a threat display. "Your Majesty." "I didn't touch it," Lisa began, holding up her scanner. You dare approach the sacred armor without permission? Jathara advanced into the room, and her voice carried notes that the translator identified as profound betrayal. You humans claim to respect our traditions, and then defile our most precious relic. Guards surrounded Lisa immediately, and more came running at the sound of their queen's distress. Jake and the rest of the human team were roused from their quarters and brought to the throne room to witness the confrontation. Jake's heart sank as he saw Lisa standing near the armor with her scanner still in hand. This was exactly what he had feared, and now everything they had worked for was falling apart. Your Majesty. Jake stepped forward with his hands raised in a peaceful gesture. Please allow me to... Silence. Jathara's roar cut him off. Your engineer has committed a grave offense against our people. She has violated sacred law and dishonored 7,000 cycles of tradition. The queen's body trembled with emotion, and her 6 arms gestured dramatically. No outsider may approach the armor of queens. The penalty is exile from all Velsharan space and the severance of all diplomatic ties. Jake felt the weight of... The human delegation was confined to their quarters under armed guard while Queen Jathara convened an emergency council. Lisa sat on her bunk with her head in her hands. Knowing she had jeopardized everything despite her good intentions, Jake paced the room like a caged animal, his diplomatic mind racing through possible solutions. Why didn't you listen to me? He asked Lisa, trying to keep the frustration from his voice. I specifically told you to stay away from their artifacts. I know. Lisa's voice was barely above a whisper, but Jake. The armor is damaged. Those microfractures I saw are going to spread, and eventually the whole structure will fail. I was trying to help. Help? Jake stopped pacing and looked at her with disbelief. You started a diplomatic crisis that could set human-alien relations back decades. Before Lisa could respond, the door opened and a Velsharan official entered with 4 guards. The official's crystalline plates were colored in deep blue, which the translation guide indicated meant formal authority. The human called Lisa Chun will come with us, the official said in a tone that allowed no argument. Queen Jathara has summoned the Galactic Council, and your transgression will be judged. Before representatives of all major species, Lisa stood and met Jake's eyes. I'll explain everything to them, she said. Maybe if they understand I meant no harm. The road to disaster is paved with good intentions, Jake replied bitterly. But then his expression softened. I'll do what I can from here. Just be honest with them and show proper respect. Lisa was escorted through the palace to a massive chamber she hadn't seen before. It was a communication hub with holographic projectors arranged in a circle already. Images of alien representatives were materializing as the council convened. She recognized some of the species from her diplomatic briefings. The towering Krenth with their rocky hides, the fluid Aquarians who existed in mobile water tanks, the fox-like Renari with their keen eyes, and at least a dozen others she couldn't name. Queen Jathara stood at the center of the circle with her posture rigid and her voice carrying the weight of centuries. Honored council members, I have called this emergency session because the humans have violated our most sacred traditions. A Krenth representative, whose name was displayed as Council Elder Thurin, rumbled in a deep voice that resonated through the chamber. What violation has occurred, Queen Jathara? The humans are new to our galactic community, but they have not shown themselves to be deliberately disrespectful. One of their engineers approached the armor of queens without permission. Jathara explained, and her harmonic voice quavered with barely controlled emotion. This armor has been passed down through 47 generations and is the symbol of our royal legitimacy. No outsider has ever been permitted to touch it, and the penalty for such violation is absolute. A Rainari diplomat whose fur shimmered with silver highlights spoke up with cunning in her eyes. This is most troubling indeed. Perhaps it demonstrates that humans are too young and too undisciplined for membership in our council. They do not understand the weight of ancient traditions. Lisa felt anger rising in her chest, but she forced herself to remain calm. "May I speak in my own defense?" Jatharus' mandibles clicked sharply. "You have no right to speak before this council." "Violator." "Actually," Elder Thurin interjected with a fairness that Lisa appreciated. "Under council law, any accused party has the right to explain their actions before judgment is passed." "Let the human speak." The Queen's exoskeleton darkened further, but she gestured for Lisa to proceed. Lisa took a deep breath and chose her words carefully. "Your Majesty, honored council members, I did approach the armor without permission, and for that I offer my sincere apology. However, I never touched it. I used a scanning device to analyze its structure from a distance. Why would you dare to scan our sacred relic?" Shithora demanded. What purpose could justify such disrespect? "Because I saw damage," Lisa said simply. "My specialty is exotic metal alloys and structural engineering. When I saw the armor displayed in the throne room, I noticed patterns that indicated internal stress fractures. I was concerned that the armor might fail catastrophically." The chamber fell silent for a moment. Then the Renari diplomat laughed with a sharp yipping sound. "The human claims to know more about Velsharan artifacts than the Velsharans themselves. This is arrogance beyond measure." But Elder Thurin raised a massive hand for silence. "What did your scans reveal, human engineer?" Lisa pulled out her scanner and projected its data into the holographic space above them. Complex molecular diagrams appeared showing the armor's alloy structure with bright red lines, highlighting the fracture patterns. "The armor is made from an alloy I've never seen before," Lisa explained while pointing to the data, "but the crystalline matrix shows clear signs of fatigue stress. These microfractures are spreading through approximately 30% of the scales, and based on the progression rate, the armor will lose structural integrity within 2 solar cycles, maybe less if it experiences any significant impact." Jathara stared at the projections, and her anger shifted to something else, something that looked like fear. "This cannot be. The armor of queens is eternal, forged by the ancient masters with techniques long lost to us. Your Majesty," Lisa said gently, "nothing is eternal. Even the finest materials experience wear over thousands of years, especially if they've been subjected to combat or ceremonial stress. I'm sorry to be the one to tell you this." The Queen turned away from the council and her voice became quiet. "If what you say is true, then my legitimacy as ruler is compromised. The armor has been worn by every queen since the founding of our empire, and its strength represents the strength of our line. If it fails while I wear it—" She didn't finish the sentence, but everyone understood the implications. A new voice entered the discussion. It belonged to a species Lisa didn't recognize, something that looked like floating orbs of light. This is a convenient excuse for the human's violation. Perhaps she invented this damage to justify her disrespect. "I can verify the scans," Elder Thurin offered. "The Krent have advanced material analysis capabilities. If the Queen permits, I will send technical specialists to examine the armor and confirm or deny these findings." Jathara stood silent for what felt like an eternity. Finally, she spoke with resignation in her harmonic tones. "Do what you must. If the armor is truly damaged, then I need to know." The council session was suspended while Krenth engineers traveled to Velshara Prime through quantum gates. It took 6 hours for them to arrive, examine the armor with their own equipment, and compile their findings. Lisa remained in a holding chamber during this time with guards posted outside. Jake was allowed to visit her briefly, and he brought food that she couldn't bring herself to eat. "Whatever happens," he told her, "you did what you thought was right. Sometimes that's all we can do." When the council reconvened, the lead Krenth engineer presented his findings with somber professionalism. The human's analysis was accurate. "We found extensive microfracturing throughout the armor structure. In fact, the damage is worse than her initial scans suggested. There are stress points we believe could fail with as little as 200 pounds of direct force. The revelation sent shockwaves through the council. Several species began arguing among themselves, while others demanded to know how such a sacred object could have been allowed to deteriorate. Queen Jathara seemed to shrink despite her imposing size. Her voice carried notes of despair. 7,000 cycles of tradition, and I am the queen who allowed it to crumble. How can I rule when I cannot even protect our most precious legacy? The Renari diplomat seized the opportunity. This proves that humans bring chaos wherever they go. Even when they claim to help, they expose weaknesses and create problems. I move that all human, diplomatic missions be suspended until they prove themselves worthy of our trust. Several council members voiced agreement, and Lisa felt her heart sink. Not only had she failed to help, she had given ammunition to those who opposed human advancement in the galaxy. But then something unexpected happened. Elder Thurin spoke with authority that silenced the chamber. The Rainari's logic is flawed. The human did not create this damage, she merely revealed it. If Queen Jathara had worn that armor in the battle or ceremony without knowing its condition, the consequences could have been tragic. The Krenth Elder speaks wisdom, said an Aquarian representative whose voice bubbled through their translation unit. The human acted from concern rather than malice. Yes, she violated protocol, but she also provided valuable knowledge. Jathara looked up at the council with something shifting in her multifaceted eyes. My own engineers missed this damage because we were so certain of the armor's invincibility. We did not question what we believed to be eternal truth, but this young human, knowing nothing of our traditions or history, saw what we refused to see. The Queen's mandibles drooped in a gesture of defeat. The alloy was created using techniques lost 3,000 cycles ago. Our best metallurgists have tried to recreate it for ceremonial purposes, but always failed. We do not know how to repair what we can no longer make. Lisa had been listening to all of this with growing determination. Now she stepped forward, despite the guards moving to stop her. Your Majesty, I might be able to help. You? Jathara's voice. The palace workshop was a marvel of alien technology that combined organic crystal growth chambers with traditional metallurgical equipment. Lisa stood in the center of it all, surrounded by tools both familiar and completely foreign to her engineering experience. Queen Jathara had ordered her finest craftsmen to provide Lisa with whatever resources she needed. But the Velcheron artisans watched her with a mixture of hope and deep suspicion. They had spent their entire lives working with their people's traditional materials. And now their queen had entrusted their most sacred object to an alien who had been among them for less than 3 days. Armor rested on a specialized workstand that held each piece suspended in a magnetic field. Lisa had carefully disassembled it scale by scale, documenting the position and connection of every component. She had worked for 12 hours straight, just completing the documentation. Knowing that any mistake in reassembly would be catastrophic, Jake visited the workshop with food and encouragement. "How's it going?" he asked quietly, noting the exhaustion in Lisa's eyes. "It's both worse and better than I thought," she replied while examining a scale under high magnification. "The microfractures have spread through nearly 40% of the armor now. But I think I understand how the original alloy was created." She pointed to her analysis screens were complex. Molecular diagrams rotated in three-dimensional space. The ancient Velcherons used a technique that combined crystal growth with metallic bonding. It's like nothing I've ever seen in human metallurgy. But it follows principles that make sense once you understand the underlying physics. Can you repair it? Jake asked with concern evident in his voice. Lisa was quiet for a long moment before answering. "I don't know. I can probably stop the fractures from spreading. But whether I can restore the armor's full strength, that's a much bigger question. Do your best," Jake said with a hand on her shoulder. "That's all anyone can ask." He left her to her work, and Lisa turned her attention back to the challenge before her. She had identified 3 critical problems that needed solving. First, the fractures had weakened the crystalline matrix that gave the alloy its unique properties. She needed to reintroduce crystal growth at the molecular level without disrupting the metallic bond. Second, the original forging process had used temperatures and pressures that her equipment couldn't match. She would have to find alternative methods that achieved the same results through different means. Third, any repair work that was visible or changed to the armor's appearance would be seen as desecration. She had to work at a level so precise that the finished product would look exactly as it had for thousands of years. Lisa started with the most damaged scales and used her portable fusion welder in conjunction with a Velcharon crystal harmonizer. The harmonizer was a device that induced specific vibration frequencies in crystalline structures, and she had spent hours learning how to calibrate it properly. The first attempt was a disaster. She applied too much heat, and the scale surface began to warp. Before she could shut down the welder, her heart sank as she realized she had just made things worse. One of the Velcharon artisans, whose name translated as Keeper of Old Ways, approached her with what might have been sympathy in his clicking speech. "You attempt the impossible, human. Accept defeat before you destroy what remains." "I'm not giving up after one failed attempt," Lisa said firmly while examining the warped scale. "I just need to adjust my approach." She studied the damage she had caused and realized her mistake. She had been thinking about the problem like a human metallurgist, applying direct heat to create molecular bonding. But the Velcharon alloy required a different approach altogether. The key was in the harmonizer. If she could induce the right frequency patterns while applying very gentle heat, the crystal matrix would naturally guide the metallic elements into proper alignment. It was less like welding and more like coaxing the metal to remember its original form. Her second attempt showed promise. The scale accepted the harmonic treatment, and the fractures began to close at a microscopic level. It was working, but agonizingly slowly. "This is going to take longer than I thought," she told Jake when he returned that evening. "Each scale needs at least 6 hours of continuous treatment, and there are over 200 scales in the complete armor." Jake did the math in his head, and his expression fell. "That's 1,200 hours, 50 days of continuous work if you don't sleep." "I'll work in shifts," Lisa said, though she knew that was easier said than done. "Some of the Velcharon artisans are starting to understand my methods. Maybe they can help," but the artisans were reluctant to participate. They saw Lisa's techniques as too foreign and too risky. What if they made a mistake and damaged the armor further? Better to let the human take all the responsibility and all the blame. Lisa worked alone through the night and into the next day. She refined her technique with each scale, finding the precise combination of heat, pressure, and harmonic frequency that would restore the crystalline matrix without visible changes to the surface. Queen Jathara visited the workshop on the second day of repairs and watched in silence as Lisa worked. The human's hands were steady despite obvious exhaustion, and her focus was absolute. She treated each scale as if it were the most important object in the universe. "Why do you push yourself so hard?" the queen asked quietly. "You could work at a slower pace and rest between sessions." Lisa didn't look up from her work, because every hour that passes, the fractures spread a little further. And because your people need to see that their queen's armor will be whole again, the longer this takes, the more doubt creeps in. Jaesur's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. "You understand more about leadership than I expected from such a young species. My grandmother was a leader," Lisa replied while adjusting the harmonizer's frequency. "She taught me that people need to see strength in their leaders, especially during times of uncertainty. If I show doubt or weakness now, it undermines everything you're trying to accomplish." The queen was quiet for a moment. Then she spoke with unusual vulnerability in her harmonic voice. "I have not yet earned my place in the line of queens. Each of my ancestors added one scale to this armor, representing their greatest achievement or victory. But I have ruled during a time of peace and prosperity, which sounds good, but leaves me with no defining moment. Lisa finally looked up from her work and met the Queen's multifaceted eyes. Sometimes the hardest battles are the ones we fight within ourselves. You're allowing an outsider to touch your most sacred object because you put your people's needs above your pride. That takes more courage than any military victory. Jathara seemed taken aback by the observation. I had not considered it in that way. Maybe that's your defining achievement, Lisa suggested gently. Being the queen who chose wisdom over tradition when it mattered most. The conversation seemed to shift something in the queen's perception. She began visiting the workshop regularly and slowly started asking questions about Lisa's techniques, not to interfere, but to genuinely understand as the days passed. Word of the repair work spread throughout Valshara Prime and beyond. Some species in the Galactic Council saw it as proof that humans were valuable allies who solved problems rather than created them, while others doubled down on their opposition and called for Lisa's immediate expulsion regardless of her success. The Renari diplomat was particularly vocal in her criticism. The humans manipulate Queen Jathara with false promises and alien tricks. They seek to make the Velsharans dependent on human technology, but Elder Thurin and several other council members pushed back against such claims. The human works with Velsharan tools and follows Velsharan principles. She adapts herself to their ways rather than forcing them to adopt hers. This is the mark of a true ally. Lisa remained focused on her work and tried to ignore the political drama swirling around her. She had completed repairs on 60 scales and had developed a rhythm that allowed her to work faster without sacrificing precision. Then disaster struck on the 8th day. While treating one of the most damaged scales, a power surge from the palace's energy grid caused her equipment to spike beyond safe parameters. The scale she was working on fractured completely. Splitting into 3 pieces, Lisa stared at the broken scale in horror. This was exactly what she had feared, and now she had made the armor worse instead of better. If she couldn't repair this damage, everything would be lost. The Keeper of Old Ways approached and examined the broken scale. "You have failed, human," he said with finality in his voice. "This scale is beyond repair. The armor will be incomplete forever." "No," Lisa said firmly despite the panic clawing at her chest. "I can fix this. I just need to think." She studied the broken pieces and forced herself to calm down and analyze the problem logically. The scale had split along the fracture lines, which meant the breaks were actually cleaner than the original microfractures. If she could bond the pieces back together properly, the result might actually be stronger than before. Lisa spent the next 18 hours developing a new technique. Instead of treating the surface, she would create microscopic channels through which she could inject a bonding agent made from Velsharan crystal matrix suspended in a metallic carrier. It was delicate work that required absolutely perfect precision. She drilled the channels using a laser calibrated to. The workshop had transformed from a place of tension into something resembling a collaboration. Velsharan artisans now worked alongside Lisa, learning her hybrid techniques that combined human engineering principles with their own traditional methods. The Keeper of Old Ways had become her most dedicated student, and he worked through the nights to master the precise frequency patterns required for crystal matrix restoration. Lisa had been working for 23 days straight with only brief periods of rest. She had completed repairs on 178 scales, and each one tested stronger than before. But the work was taking its toll on her body, and mind. Jake brought her another meal and insisted she eat something. "You're gonna collapse if you don't take better care of yourself," he said with genuine worry. "I'm fine," Lisa replied automatically, though her hands trembled slightly as she picked up her tools. "You're not fine," Jake countered. I've known you for 6 years and I've never seen you this exhausted. The armor can wait a few hours while you sleep. But Lisa shook her head stubbornly. Every day I spend on this repair is another day that humanity's future hangs in the balance. I can rest when it's done. Queen Jathara had been listening from the workshop entrance, and now she stepped forward. The human speaks truth. But she also drives herself too hard. I will assign healers to monitor her condition and ensure she does not harm herself. Your Majesty, that's not necessary, Lisa began. But the Queen's gesture stopped her. It is necessary, because I commanded, Jathara said firmly. You work to save my heritage. So I will work to preserve your health. This is fair exchange. The Velsharan healers were fascinating beings who used bioresonance to detect imbalances in living systems. They monitored Lisa's vital signs and periodically adjusted the workshop's atmosphere to include compounds that helped reduce fatigue and improve focus. It wasn't perfect, but it helped as the repair work progressed. Queen Jathara spent more time in the workshop, and Lisa began to understand the deep emotional weight the armor carried. Jathara would sometimes touch individual scales and speak of the queens, who had warned them, her grandmother, who had unified 3 warring factions, her great-great-grandmother, who had first made contact with alien species, her ancestor 40 generations back who had defended the homeworld against an invasion. Each queen added 1 scale to represent their legacy. Jathara explained while watching Lisa work on a particularly ancient piece. But I have not yet determined what my contribution will be. My reign has been prosperous, but unremarkable. Lisa looked up from her delicate work with the harmonizer. I think you're underestimating yourself, Your Majesty. You've maintained peace during a time when the galaxy is full of conflict. And you've shown the courage to trust an outsider with your most precious possession. Those aren't small achievements. The Queen's mandibles drooped in a gesture Lisa had learned meant sadness or regret. But they are not the kind of achievements that earn a place in legend. My people expect grand victories and dramatic moments, not quiet maintenance of what already exists. Maybe it's time to change what your people expect, Lisa suggested carefully. The universe is full of warriors and conquerors. It could use more leaders who choose wisdom over glory. Jathara was quiet for a long moment. Then she shared something she had never told anyone outside her closest advisors. When I was chosen as heir to the throne, I was the youngest and smallest of my mother's offspring. The others were stronger and more aggressive. But my mother selected me because she said I had the patience to listen and the wisdom to learn. Sometimes, I wonder if she made the right choice. Lisa stopped working and gave the Queen her full attention. Did you ever ask her why those qualities mattered more than strength? She died before I could, Jathara replied with harmonic notes that conveyed deep sorrow. A plague took her during my first year as queen, and I have ruled in her shadow ever since. Then honor her choice by proving it was correct, Lisa said gently. Show your people that listening and learning are just as important as fighting and conquering. You're already doing that by allowing me to be here. The Queen seemed to consider this perspective, and something shifted in her posture. You are wise beyond your years, human Lisa-chan. Perhaps your species has much to teach mine after all. The repair work entered its final phase on day 35. Lisa had completed all but 12 of the scales. And these last pieces were the most challenging because they were the oldest and most damaged. Some dated back to the armor's original creation 7,000 years ago. Keeper of Old Ways worked beside her now with steady hands and deep concentration. He had mastered the basic techniques and could handle the simpler repairs, which allowed Lisa to focus on the most difficult challenges. One scale in particular proved almost impossible. It was the very first scale ever added to the armor, placed there by the founding queen, whose name translated roughly as she, who united the scattered colonies. This scale was so fragile that even touching it risked causing it to crumble completely. Lisa studied it for hours, using every scanning technique she knew. The crystalline matrix had degraded to the point where it was held together more by tradition than by actual molecular bonds. One move and it would disintegrate into dust. This may be beyond even your skills, the Keeper of Old Ways said quietly. Perhaps we should seal it in stasis and preserve what remains rather than risk destroying it. But Lisa refused to accept defeat. If we seal it in stasis, the armor will never be complete. Queen Jathara deserves to wear her heritage whole, not as fragments in preservation chambers. She developed a new approach that was so delicate it made all her previous work seem crude by comparison. Instead of using direct energy application, she would create a resonance field that would encourage the scale's remaining molecular bonds to strengthen themselves through harmonic, sympathetic vibration. It was less like repair work and more like coaxing a dying flower back to life through pure patience and care. Lisa sat with the scale for 40 hours straight, adjusting frequencies so minutely that the changes were measured in fractions of a hertz. Jake watched from a distance with his heart in his throat. If this failed, everything Lisa had accomplished would be overshadowed by the loss of the armor's most historically significant piece, and humanity's reputation would suffer accordingly. The workshop was absolutely silent, except for the soft humming of the harmonizer. Even the normally bustling Velcheron artisans stopped their work to watch the human engineer perform what seemed like a miracle. Slowly, impossibly, the scale began to respond. Microscopic cracks closed themselves as the crystalline matrix remembered its original structure. The metallic elements flowed back into proper alignment like water, finding its natural course. Lisa's hands never wavered, despite the exhaustion that made her entire body ache. She had entered a state of such perfect focus that nothing existed except her, the scale, and the delicate dance of frequencies that would determine success or failure. When she finally stepped back 72 hours after beginning the procedure, the scale rested on its support stand, looking exactly as it had when the founding queen had first placed it on the armor, except now it was structurally sound and would last another 7,000 years. The Keeper of Old Ways picked up the scale with trembling hands and examined it under every available analytical tool. Tears formed in his compound eyes as he realized what Lisa had achieved. This is not merely repair work, he said with awe in his harmonic voice. This is restoration in its truest sense. You have given new life to something we thought was lost forever. Queen Jathara arrived at the workshop after receiving word of Lisa's success. She looked at the founding queen's scale, and her entire body trembled with emotion that Lisa had learned to recognize as the Velcheron equivalent of crying. 7,000 years of history, Jathara whispered, preserved by an outsider who has been among us for barely more than one lunar cycle. How can I ever express adequate gratitude? You already have, Lisa replied tiredly, by trusting me when every instinct probably told you not to. The final scales were completed over the next 4 days, with the Keeper of Old Ways handling much of the work under Lisa's supervision. When the last piece was treated and tested, the moment came to reassemble the complete armor. This was a ceremony that required precision and reverence. Each scale had to be placed in exactly the right position and connected with exactly the right amount of force. One mistake and the whole structure could fail. Lisa worked with 3 Velcheron master craftsmen to perform the reassembly. It took 16 hours of continuous effort, but finally the last connection was made, and the armor stood whole on its display stand. Workshop fell silent as everyone stared at the completed work. The armor gleamed with an inner light that seemed stronger than before. And when the Keeper of Old Ways ran a structural analysis, The results showed strength levels exceeding the original specifications by 12%. Impossible, he breathed. The armor is better than it was when it was first created. How did you achieve this? Lisa smiled wearily. By combining the best of both our people's knowledge. Your ancestors were brilliant metallurgists, and I just helped their work reach its full potential by adding techniques they didn't have access to 7,000 years ago. Queen Jathara approached the armor and the royal chamber was filled with delegates from across the galaxy, all gathered to witness what Queen Jathara had promised would be an unprecedented ceremony. Lisa stood among the human delegation wearing formal diplomatic attire. Still exhausted from her weeks of intensive work, but unable to suppress the nervousness she felt about whatever the Queen had planned, Jake stood beside her and whispered quietly, "Any idea what this is about?" "The Queen's been very mysterious. No clue," Lisa admitted. "But given everything that's happened, I'm just hoping it's not another crisis." The crowd fell silent as Queen Jathara entered the chamber wearing the restored armor of queens for the first time. The effect was breathtaking. The armor seemed to glow with an inner radiance that made the Queen appear larger than life. And with each step she took, the scales chimed with subtle harmonic tones that resonated through the crystalline palace structure. The Queen's voice rang out with authority and warmth combined. "Honored guests, representatives of the Galactic Council, and friends both old and new, today we gather not to judge or condemn, but to celebrate an achievement that transcends the boundaries between our species." She gestured toward Lisa with one of her 6 arms. 43 days ago, a young human engineer committed what my people considered a grave offense. She approached the sacred armor of queens without permission, violating traditions that have stood for 7,000 cycles. The Renari diplomat shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Clearly unsure where this speech was leading, Zotha continued, "But in committing this offense, Lisa Chun revealed a truth that my own people had failed to see, that even our most precious and eternal symbols are subject to the ravages of time. The armor was failing, and without her intervention, it would have crumbled to dust within months." Murmurs spread through the assembled crowd as the implications sank in. If the armor had failed while the Queen was wearing it, the political and cultural consequences for the Velsharan Empire would have been catastrophic. Lisa Chun could have walked away, the Queen said, while her mandibles clicked in a pattern that conveyed deep respect. She could have accepted exile and left us to discover our loss too late, but instead, she offered to help. And she spent more than a month of her life working to save something that belonged to people who had treated her with suspicion and anger. The Queen approached Lisa directly and extended all 6 of her arms in a gesture of profound gratitude. "You gave my heritage new life when it was dying. You preserved 7,000 years of history, Wed, was on the verge of being lost forever, and you did so with a skill and dedication that honors the memory of every queen who came before me." Lisa felt tears forming in her eyes, but she managed to keep her voice steady. "Your Majesty, I only did what any engineer would do when they see something precious in danger of being destroyed." "No," Jathara said firmly. "What you did went far beyond technical expertise. You showed respect for our traditions, even while working to preserve them. You learned our methods and incorporated them into your own knowledge. And you never gave up even when faced with seemingly impossible challenges. These are the qualities that define true greatness." The Queen turned to address the full assembly. "For 7,000 cycles, every queen of my line has added 1 scale to this armor to represent their greatest achievement. My grandmother added a scale when she unified the 3 warring factions. My great-great-grandmother added a scale when she made first contact with the Krent. People, each scale tells a story of courage, wisdom, or sacrifice." Jathara's posture shifted, and her harmonic voice filled with emotion. "I have ruled for 32 cycles and have accomplished many things. but I could not determine which achievement was worthy of adding my scale until now. She gestured, and several Velcharon artisans entered the chamber, carrying a gleaming new scale on a ceremonial cushion. The scale was different from all the others. It was made from the same alloy as the original armor, but its surface bore an engraving that made the entire assembly gasp in astonishment. The engraving showed two hands clasped together. One was clearly Velcharon with its chitinous structure and multiple joints, while the other was unmistakably human with 5 fingers and soft skin. The detail was exquisite, and the symbolism was impossible to miss. This scale represents my greatest achievement as queen, Jathara declared. Not a military victory or territorial expansion, but the forging of true friendship between species who should have been enemies. It represents the moment. I chose trust over tradition and wisdom over pride. The queen picked up the scale with reverent care and approached Lisa. But this scale carries a second purpose. It is also the first time in our 7,000-year history that someone outside the line of queens has been permitted to add to the armor Lisa Chun. You have earned the right to place this scale upon the armor of queens, and in doing so, you will become forever part of our heritage. Lisa's mind reeled with the magnitude of what was being offered. She looked at Jake, who nodded encouragingly, and then at the assembled Galactic Council members, who watched with varying degrees of amazement and approval. Your Majesty, Lisa said while trying to keep her voice from shaking. I am deeply honored, but I'm not Velcharon. Are you certain this won't offend your traditions? Traditions that cannot adapt to new truths are not traditions. Jathara replied with wisdom in her harmonic tones. They are merely chains that bind us to the past. You have shown me that honoring our heritage does not mean refusing to grow. The queen handed Lisa the scale and guided her to the armor's display stand. The keeper of old ways stood nearby with tools ready to assist, but his expression was one of pure joy rather than the suspicion. He had shown weeks ago Lisa held the scale carefully and examined the connection points. She had designed this mechanism herself during the repair work, creating a new joining system that would allow scales to be added without weakening the overall structure. It was fitting that the first use of her innovation would be to add a scale representing human Velcharon. Friendship with steady hands and the precision she had developed over weeks of intensive work. Lisa positioned the scale and activated the bonding sequence. Crystal matrices flowed into alignment. Metallic elements fused at the molecular level. And within moments, the scale was permanently part of the armor. The chamber erupted in harmonized clicking sounds that Lisa had learned was the Velcharon equivalent of applause. Representatives from species across the galaxy rose to their feet in respect. And even the Renari diplomat grudgingly acknowledged the historic significance of the moment queen. Jathara embraced Lisa in the traditional Velcharon manner, with all 6 arms creating a circle of protection and respect. You came to our world as a stranger, and you leave as family, she said softly enough that only Lisa could hear. My people will remember this day for the next 7,000 cycles, when they separated. The queen turned to address the Galactic Council with formal authority. Let it be recorded in all histories that on this day, the Velcharon Empire declares humanity to be our trusted allies and honored friends. Any species that threatens human worlds will answer to the might of Velshara, and any species that stands with humanity stands with us. Elder Thurin rose from his seat with his massive stone body radiating approval. The Krenth Collective seconds this declaration and adds our own voice to it. Humanity has proven themselves worthy of respect through both their skill and their compassion. One by one, other species added their support until even the most skeptical members of the council had to acknowledge that humanity's standing in galactic politics had fundamentally changed. The formal ceremony concluded, but the celebrations continued for 3 days. The palace hosted feasts and gatherings where species from across the galaxy mingled and shared stories. Lisa found herself surrounded by engineers and scientists from a dozen different worlds, all eager to learn about her repair techniques and discuss collaborative projects on the final evening before the human delegation was scheduled to depart. Lisa stood alone in the throne room looking at the armor. It gleamed in the soft light, and the new scale she had added seemed to pulse with special significance. Queen Jathara entered quietly and stood beside her. Having second thoughts about what we accomplished? No, Lisa replied with a small smile. Just trying to process everything that's happened. 6 weeks ago, I was just an engineer on a routine diplomatic mission. And now I'm apparently part of Velsharan royal history. The Queen's mandibles clicked with amusement. Life has a way of taking us in unexpected directions. I was supposed to be a traditional queen who maintained the status quo. And instead, I became the one who changed everything. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment before Lisa spoke again. Your Majesty, can I ask you something? When you first caught me near the armor, you were so angry. What changed? Jathara considered the question carefully. At first, I saw only the violation of our sacred traditions. I was hurt and defensive because the armor represents everything I fear. I'm not strong. Eternal, worthy of my ancestors' legacy. She touched the armor gently. But as I watched you work, I began to understand that strength doesn't always mean being unbreakable. Sometimes it means knowing when to ask for help and having the courage to accept it. You taught me that lesson through your actions, not your words.